Hey there, how's everyone doing tonight? Thank you for joining me here on my channel, The Magical Solution. We are live tonight here on YouTube, on my private Facebook group, The Magical Solution, This Is How We Grow, and of course on TikTok. We are going to be continuing with reading our book, The Spirit Book by Alan Kardec. We are now on chapter 27, I believe. And we're getting there, you guys. Look, we only got this much left. That is not a lot. We went through all this already. So I'm really proud of us. We're doing it. And then we're going to read the Medium's book right after this one. And let's get started. So we're on the chapter of the law of destruction. And in this chapter, we are going to cover the necessary destruction and abusive destruction, destructive calamities, war, murder, cruelty, dueling, and the death penalty. So these are all going to get covered in this chapter. A lot of stuff. So let's do it. Now, for those of you, before I get started, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, okay, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you guys like and subscribe to my channel and share and all that good stuff. But basically, this book, in a very quick synapse nutshell, is a book written by Alan Kardec, who was a scientist and a very big skeptic, who sort of dived into the world of mediumship. And these books are coming from the perspective of him sort of interviewing other mediums. And he's interviewing them with a skeptic's mind, with a scientific mind. He's asking hard hitting questions in the hopes to trip them up and whatnot. And the answers to his questions are being answered by spirits themselves that are being channeled by the medium. So that's pretty much how these books go. Um, so I try my best to change my voice a little bit when I'm asking a question versus when I'm answering the question based on the book. So hopefully you guys like it. All right, so let's get to it. So necessary destruction and abusive destruction. Question 728. Is destruction a law of nature? It is necessary for everything to be destroyed in order to be reborn and regenerated. What you call destruction is no more than transformation that is aimed at renewing and improving living beings. Has the destruction instinct been given to living beings for providential purposes? God's creatures are the instruments that God uses for attaining the divine ends. In order to feed themselves, living beings destroy each other with the dual purpose of maintaining the balance of reproduction, which might otherwise become excessive, and utilizing the remains of their external envelopes. But it is only the envelope that is destroyed. The envelope is only an accessory and not the essential part of the thinking being. The essential part is the indestructible, intelligent principle, which is developed through the various metamorphoses that it undergoes. Question 729. If destruction is necessary for the regeneration of beings, why does nature surround them with the means of self-preservation and conservation? To prevent their destruction before the proper time. Any destruction that occurs too soon retards the development of the intellectual principle. That is why God has given to each being the need to stay alive and reproduce. 730. Since death should lead us to a better life and deliver us from the ills of this world, and should therefore be desired instead of dreaded, why do humans have an instinctive horror of it and see it as a cause of apprehension? We have already stated that humans should seek to prolong their life in order to accomplish their task. That is why God has given them the self-preservation instinct. It sustains them in all of their trials. Without it, they would frequently give into discouragement. The secret voice that tells them to avoid death also tells them they may yet do something more for their progress. Whenever danger threatens them, it is a warning to them that they must take advantage of at the time God has granted them. But ingrates usually give thanks to their lucky star instead of their creator. Mm. 731. Why has nature placed the agents of destruction side by side with the means of self-preservation? The remedy beside the illness. We already have told you, in order to maintain balance and to serve as a counterweight. 732. Is the need for destruction the same on all the worlds? It is in proportion to how material each particular world is. It disappears altogether in a pure physical and moral state. On other worlds, more evolved than yours, the conditions of existence are altogether different. 733. Will the need for destruction always exist for humankind here on Earth? The need for destruction diminishes among humans to the degree that their spirit overcomes matter. That is why you may observe that the horror of destruction follows upon intellectual and moral development. 734. In their present state, do humans have an unlimited right of destruction in regard to animals? That right is limited to the need of providing for their food and their safety. Abuse has never been a right. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? When it comes to the destruction of animals, killing animals, it is for your food and for your safety. It is not to abuse it for freaking fur coats and for, testing and trialing makeup and whatnot. That's what he's talking about here. 735. What about the destruction that exceeds the limits and I'm sorry. What about destruction that exceeds the limits of need and safety? Hunting, for instance, when it is no other objective than the pleasure of destroying needlessly. Mm. It is a predominance of the animal nature over the spiritual nature. All destruction that exceeds the limits of need is a violation of God's law. Animals only destroy to satisfy their needs, but humans, who have free will, destroy without need. They will be called to account for abusing that freedom granted to them, because in such cases they yield to base instincts. Mm. 736. Do those creatures that carry their scrupulousness to excess regarding the destruction of animals have any special merit? Such excess is a sentiment that in and of itself is praiseworthy, but it becomes abusive and its merit is neutralized by other kinds of abuse. They act more out of the superstitious fear than true humaneness. We're now on the subject of destructive calamities. Let's get to it. 737. For what purpose does God inflict humankind with destructive calamities? To force them to progress more quickly. Have we not stated that destruction is necessary for the moral regeneration of spirits who accomplish a new degree of perfection during each new existence? You must see the end in order to appreciate the result. You only judge such things from your own personal point of view, and you regard such afflictions as calamities because of the injury that they cause you. However, these hardships are often necessary in order to make things arrive at a better order more quickly, and to accomplish in a few years what would otherwise require many centuries. 738. Could God employ other methods instead of destructive calamities for improving humankind? Yes, and they are employed every single day. Through the knowledge of good and evil, God has given to each of you the means of progressing. However, humans do not take advantage of them. Thus, it is necessary to afflict them in their pride and make them feel their own weakness. Hi, Fran. It is The Spirit Book by Allan Kardec. That's the book that we're reading. But the mortal person succumbs to such calamities along with the wicked. Is this just? Throughout life, humans relate everything to their body, but after death, they think differently. As we have already stated, the life of the body is almost nothing. A century in your world is but a flash in eternity. The sufferings that last a few of your months or days are nothing and are only a lesson that will serve you in the future. Spirits who have pre existed and have survived everything else compromise the real world. They are the children of God and the objects of divine kindness. Bodies are no more than disguises behind which they make their appearance in the world. In the great calamities that decimate humankind, those who succumb are like an army during war, witnessing their uniforms become tattered, worn out, or lost. The general is more concerned for their soldiers than their uniforms. But aren't the victims of these calamities actual victims nonetheless? If we consider life as it is in itself and how insignificant it is in comparison with the infinite, the less importance we would attach to it. In another life, those victims will find ample compensation for their sufferings if they endured them without complaining. Whether death results from a calamity or an ordinary cause, we cannot escape it when the hour of our departure has come. The only difference is that in the former case, a greater number depart at the same time. If we could elevate ourselves through thought so as to encompass all humankind in a single glance, these terrible calamities would seem no more than passing storms in the destiny of the world. 739. Are destructive calamities useful? Are destructive calamities useful from a physical point of view, notwithstanding the hardships that they cause? Yes. They sometimes modify the conditions of a region, but the good that results from them is usually only felt by future generations. 740. Couldn't calamities also be moral trials for humankind by exposing humans to the most fictive needs? Calamities are trials that furnish humans with an opportunity to exert their intelligence and to demonstrate their patience and resignation before the will of God. At the same time, calamities enable them to develop the sentiments of self denial, self detachment, and love for their neighbor if they are not dominated by selfishness. 741. May we avert calamities that afflict us? Yes, in part, but not as a generally not as not as is generally supposed. Many calamities are the consequences of your own improvidence. As you acquire knowledge and experience, you become able to avert them, that is, to prevent them if you know how to study their causes. He's basically saying, know your history and you won't repeat your history, right? Among the ills that afflict humankind, however, there are those of a general nature that belong to the designs of Providence and from which all individuals feel the repercussions in a greater or lesser proportion. They can do nothing about these except resign themselves to God's will. But even these ills are usually aggravated by human carelessness. Among the destructive calamities that are natural and independent of human actions, we find first and foremost plagues, famines, floods, and the inclement weather conditions that are fatal to the productions of the earth. But in science, in works of art, in improvements of agriculture, in crop rotation and irrigation, and in the study of hygiene and conditions, has not humankind found the means to neutralize or at least mitigate many of these disasters? Are not certain regions that are formerly devastated by terrible calamities protected nowadays? Therefore, what will mankind not accomplish for their material well being when they know how to make use of all the resources of their intelligence and when, caring for their own self preservation, they know how to ally with it the sentiment of true charity for their fellow beings? Woo! This is a beautiful chapter. This is a beautiful piece of the chapter because it really, really emphasizes how important it is that we as a society and as a world need to work together. Getting our best scientists together, getting our best doctors together, getting our best minds together to figure out how to prevent quote unquote calamities, how to prevent wars, how to prevent just total annihilation by our own action. And by doing this, understanding that the self-preservation of all living things is the cause of is the drive for all of this, right? And putting our differences aside so that we can survive together in peace and in harmony and with the utmost intelligence at our esteem, right? This is the thing that we strive for. And I think this chapter really exemplifies that. I think that that is a really great way to look at it, right? So now we're on the next subject, which is war. 742. What is the cause that leads humankind to war? The predominance of the animal nature over the spiritual nature and the satisfaction of their passions. In the state of barbarity, nations only know right by might, and that is why war is a normal state for them. As humans evolve, war will become less frequent since they will avoid its causes, and when it does become necessary, they will know how to make it more humane. I really hope we see that soon because I don't see that shit anywhere. It just seems like there's just one war after another, but hopefully that will come to pass. Let's see, right? 743. Will war someday disappear from the earth? Yes, when men and women understand justice and practice God's law, then all nations will live as brothers and sisters. 744. What has been the goal of Providence in making war necessary? Freedom and progress. And he's not wrong. I mean, even till today, everything's under the name of freedom, right? All these wars, all these new restrictions, all these new laws, all in the name of freedom, right? And progress. If war is meant to bring freedom, why is it that it has usually had subjugation as its objective and result? Temporary subjugation makes people weary, thus becoming a catalyst for progress. Mm. Does it make people weary? Or is it like boiling a frog slowly? Think about it. Think about it. The Black Lives Matter movement, I think, is a great example. Literally the same argument for the last 200 years. Just basic human decency. That's all they're asking for. And they've been asking for it for the last 200 years. And the argument is still the same. The asking is still the same. Right? Is it a catalyst for progress? We'll see, right? 745. What is it to be thought about those who stir up war for their own gain? They are truly guilty and will require many lives to expiate all the murders they have caused, for they will have to answer for every individual whose death they caused to satisfy their own ambition. And now we're on the subject of murder. 746. Yo, this is deep, y'all. This is like, whoo, I don't know, but I'm feeling it. 746. Is murder a crime in God's sight? Yes, a great crime, because those who take the life of another fellow being thereby cut short a life of expiation or mission, and hence is evil. 747. Is there always the same degree of culpability in murder? We have already said God is just. God judges the intent rather than the deed. 748. Does God excuse murder in cases of legitimate defense? Only necessity can excuse it. But if we can save our life without having to take the life of the aggressor, we must do so. That's why I say, y'all, learn martial arts. Seriously. 749. Are persons culpable for the murders they commit in war? Not if they are coerced through force. Nonetheless, they are responsible for the cruelties they commit. Likewise, their display of humaneness will also be taken into account. 750. Which is more culpable in God's sight, parricide or infanticide? They are both equally culpable, for all crime is crime. 751. Why is infanticide a custom condoned by legislation among certain cultures that are already evolved from an intellectual perspective? Intellectual development does not necessarily imply moral development. A spirit of superior intelligence may be a bad spirit. It has lived many lives without improving itself morally and gaining only knowledge. Ooh, do you hear that? Do you hear that? I almost feel like reading it again. Intellectual development does not necessarily imply moral development. A spirit of superior intelligence may be a bad spirit. It has lived many lives without improving itself morally, gaining only knowledge. Listen, so we are now on the subject of cruelty. 752. May we link the sentiment of cruelty to the instinct of destruction? It is the destruction instinct in its worst form, because even though destruction is sometimes necessary, cruelty never is. It is always the result of a wicked nature. 753. So, why is cruelty the dominant characteristics of primitive peoples? I hate that they use primitive and barbaric like to describe ancient cultures. It always But remember, this book was written a very long time ago. That was the scientific language of their day, right? So we have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? So let me repeat the question. Why is cruelty the dominant characteristic of primitive peoples? Among primitive peoples, as you call them, matter dominates spirit. They abandon themselves to their animal instincts, and since they do not have any other needs beyond those of the body, they care only about their own self-preservation. This is what usually makes them cruel. Moreover, people of imperfect development are under the dominion of equally imperfect spirits. These imperfect spirits remain sympathetic to them until more highly advanced peoples come to destroy or weaken their influence. Mm. 754. Doesn't cruelty result from an absence of a moral sense? You may say that the moral sense is not developed, but do not say that it is absent, since it exists in principle in all human beings. This moral sense is what later transforms them into good humane beings. It exists in the primitive, like the onset of the aroma in the bud of a flower that has not yet opened. All faculties exist in humans in a rudimentary or latent state and develop according to how favorable the circumstances are. The excessive development of some impedes or neutralizes that of others. The overexcitement of the material instincts stifles, so to speak, the moral sense, as moral development gradually weakens the purely animal faculties. 755. Why is it that in the most advanced civilizations, there are individuals who are at times as cruel as barbarians? For the same reason that on a tree loaded with good fruit, there is always some that are rotten. Such individuals have, if you wish, only the appearance of civility, wolves among the sheep. Low order, very backward spirits may incarnate among advanced peoples in the hope of their own progress. However, if the trial is too difficult, their barbaric nature will prevail. 756. Will will the society of moral individuals someday be purged of evildoers? Humankind is evolving. Those who are dominated by the instinct of evil and who are out of place among moral people will disappear little by little, like bad grain being separated from the good when threshed. But they will be born again in other envelopes. Then, with more experience, they will comprehend good and evil better. You have an example in the plants and animals that you have learned how to perfect by developing new qualities in them. Very well. It is only after many generations that perfection becomes complete. This is a picture of different existences of human beings, right? So he's talking about anyone who might be familiar with like botany and gardening and things like that, and the cross pollination or the cross breeding of certain plants, right? It's not like they just take two different plants and crossbreed them and then boom, there's a new plant. No, it takes several takes where they're taking the seedlings of each of these plants afterwards and doing the same thing over and over and over again until eventually they get the finished product they're looking at. And that's what he's describing to sort of describe the evolution of the human spirit or the spirit in general, is that it takes several passes before we finally get to a certain point. It's not just like you live one life, you get reborn, and now you're just better. It takes several passes, right? So now we're on the subject of dueling. I'm assuming dueling as in like taking a white glove and slapping a bitch across the face. I don't know, but let's see, right? 757. Can dueling be considered a case of lawful self-defense? So I guess, fist fighting, fighting each other and whatnot. Let's see. No. It is murder and an absurd custom worthy of barbarians. In a more advanced and moral civilization, people will understand that dueling is as foolish as the combats of antiquity that were regarded as a judgment of God. 758. Can dueling be considered a murder on the part of him who, knowing his own weakness, is almost certain to be killed? It is suicide. And when the odds are equal, is it murder or suicide? It is both. In all cases, even in those in which the odds are equal, the dueler is culpable, first because he coolly and deliberately attacked the life of his fellow man, and second, because he exposes his own life needlessly and without benefit to anyone else. So those of you who were in my last live, you know, the spirits talk about how actions are not seen as highly valued as the intention behind those actions, right? And so what that means is this duel, because it's needless, there's no he's not helping himself or helping anyone around him. It therefore is not favorable in the eyes of God. Whereas if you were doing something that might have seemed a little questionable, if the intention was to help those around you or help elevate self, then it might be looked at a little less intensely, if that makes sense. So for example, stealing, right? If you're stealing just because you want something, that's going to be looked at much more harshly than if you're stealing food for your family because you have no food, right? That's the whole thing of divine justice, right? 759. In dueling, what is the value of what is called the point of honor? That of pride and vanity, two swords of humankind. But aren't there cases in which honor really is at stake and where refusal would be cowardice? Well, it depends on customs and usages. Each country and each epoch has a different way of regarding such matters. Nevertheless, when human beings are better or more advanced morally, they will understand that the true point of honor is above earthly passions, and that it is neither by killing nor by getting themselves killed that a wrong is redeemed. There is more greatness and true honor in recognizing wrongdoing if we err, or in forgiving if we are right. And in all cases, in not attaching importance to the insults that cannot harm us. Exactly, Kathy. There is no edification in dueling, though they call it gentlemanly. That is a fact. So we're now on the subject of the death penalty. 760. Will the death penalty someday disappear from human legislation? The death penalty will assuredly disappear, and its demise will signal progress for humankind. When humans become more enlightened, the death penalty will be completely abolished on the earth. They will no longer need to be judged by others. I speak of a time which is still very distant from you. Social progress still leaves much to be desired, but we would be unjust toward modern society if we did not see progress in the restrictions imposed on the death penalty among more advanced nations and on the nature of the crimes to which its application is limited. If we compare the safeguards by which justice is enforced to protect the accused nowadays and the humaneness with which they are treated, even when found guilty, with what was practiced in the not too distant past, we cannot fail to recognize the path upon which humanity is progressing. 761. The law of self preservation gives us the right to defend our own life. Does this right apply when we eliminate a dangerous member of society? There are more means of saving yourselves from danger without killing. Moreover, it is necessary to open the door of repentance to the criminal rather than to close it. 762. Although the death penalty may be banned from civilized societies, wasn't it necessary in less advanced times? Necessary is not the right word. People always think a thing is necessary when they cannot find anything better. But as they become enlightened, they better understand what is just or unjust, and they repudiate the excesses committed in times of ignorance in the name of justice. 763. Is the restriction on cases in which the death penalty is applied an indication of the progress of civilization? How could you doubt that? Does your spirit not revolt when you read the reports of the human slaughters that were formerly perpetrated in the name of justice and frequently in honor of the divinity? Or the tortures to which the condemned and even the accused were submitted in order to wrest from them through excess pain a confession for a crime they very often had not even committed? Well, then, if you had lived in those times, you would have thought that it was all quite natural, and perhaps, as a judge, you would have acted likewise. It is thus that what seems just in one error seems barbaric in another. Only the divine laws are eternal. Human laws change with progress, and they will change further until they have been put in harmony with divine laws. 764. Jesus said, "Whoever kills by the sword shall perish by the sword." Don't these words represent the consecration of the penalty of Talion? And isn't the death imposed on the murderer an application of this penalty? Be careful. You are mistaken about these words, as you are about many things. The penalty of Talion is the justice of God. It is God Himself who applies it. You all suffer this penalty at every moment because you are punished wherein you have sinned, either in this life or in another. Those who have caused their fellow humans to suffer will be in a situation in which they themselves will suffer in like manner. This is the meaning of Jesus' words. Didn't He also say to you, "Forgive your enemies"? And didn't He teach you to ask God to forgive your offenses as you yourself forgive? That is, in the same proportion in which you yourself have forgiven. Understand this well. 765. What about the death penalty imposed in the name of God? It is equivalent to taking God's place in the practice of justice. Those who act thus reveal how far they are from actually understanding God and how much they still have to expiate. The death penalty is a crime when it is applied in the name of God, and those who do so will be held responsible for every murder. Yay! We're now on the next chapter, right? Because remember, we only read for 1 hour. We end at 8 o'clock. So now we're on the chapter of the law of society. And in this chapter, we're going to talk about the need for societal life, the life of isolation, and the vow of silence, and family ties. Let's get to it. The need for social life, 766. Is societal life natural? Certainly. God has made humans for living in society. Otherwise, it would have been needless for God to have endowed them with speech and all the other faculties necessary for a life of relationships. 767. Is absolute isolation contrary to the law of nature? Yes, because people instinctively seek societal living, and because all of them must cooperate in humankind's progress by mutually helping one another. 768. In seeking societal living, do people only obey a personal sentiment, or is there a wider providential purpose involved? Humans must progress. They cannot do so alone. However, since they do not all possess every faculty, they need contact with others. In isolation, they become brutish and withered. No single individual possesses the complete range of faculties. It is through societal union that individuals complete one another in order to ensure their own welfare and progress. It is because they need one another and they have been created to live in a society and not in isolation. We're now on the subject of the life of isolation and the vow of silence. 769. We can understand that as a general principle, societal life is founded on the laws of nature. But since all tastes are also natural, why would a taste for absolute isolation be condemnable if someone finds satisfaction in it? Selfish satisfaction. There are also those who find satisfaction in drunkenness. Do you approve of that? God cannot consider as pleasing a life in which persons condemn themselves to being useless to everyone. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. 770. What is to be thought of those who live in absolute seclusion in order to escape the, the pernicious contact of the world? Doubly selfish. But if such seclusion has expiation as its purpose through the imposition of harsh privations, isn't it meritorious? Doing mostly good rather than evil is the best expiation. Through such seclusion, they avoid one evil only to fall into another, since they neglect the law of love and charity. So, do you understand what's happening here? What he's saying is that the law of charity, this idea of living in a society and being of society so that you can do good for society, is above all the one main thing that will get you closer and get your spirit elevated and closer to God. And by choosing a life of seclusion and deciding to live up in a mountain somewhere so that you can meditate and get closer to God that way, yes, you're avoiding doing evil doings, but you're also avoiding doing the good and charitable duties that you need to do for your fellow man. And so in a way, you're canceling your spiritual journey out. It's like a one for one, and you're not really doing anything to progress. Plus, in the previous chapters, we talk about how usefulness is important to God, making yourself useful to your society. And that doesn't necessarily mean having a job. That doesn't necessarily mean, making money. It means being useful in the sense of doing charitable and good deeds for your fellow man, making yourself useful to society as a whole in a good charitable way. And by putting yourself up on a mountain somewhere meditating, you are also making yourself quote unquote useless. And so these two avoidances cause you to have to then be reborn again and try and figure this shit out all over again. Right? So stay busy, y'all. 771. What should we think of those who renounce the world in order to devote themselves to the relief of the unfortunate? They evolve by putting others' needs before their own. They have the double merit of placing themselves above material pleasures and of doing good by fulfilling the law of labor. And those who withdraw to seek tranquility required for certain kinds of labor? What about that? That is not the complete withdrawal of the selfish individual. They do not isolate themselves from society because they labor for it. So there's another exception, right? All right, maybe you're not doing charitable goods, but you're working laboriously for society. So if you're building people's houses, if you're mowing people's grasses, if you're doing things like that, okay, so you're not doing something charitable, but you're doing a job that fulfills a charitable purpose for your fellow man. 772. What is it to be thought of the vow of silence that has been prescribed by certain sects since remotest antiquity? You might as well ask whether speech is natural and why God has given it to us. God condemns the abuse rather than the use of divinely granted faculties. Nevertheless, silence is useful at times because in silence you can compose yourself. Your spirit becomes freer and can enter into communication with spirits and with God. However, a vow of silence is foolishness. Undoubtedly, those who regard such privations as acts of virtue have good intentions at heart, but they are mistaken by not sufficiently understanding what the true laws of God are. The vow of total silence, like the vow of isolation, deprives individuals of the societal relationships that can furnish them with the opportunities to do good and to fulfill the law of progress. We're now on the subject of family ties. Wow, we breezed through this chapter. We're pretty much done. 773. Why is it that among the animals, parents and offspring no longer recognize each other when the later no longer needs care? Animals live a material life, not a moral life. A mother's tenderness for her young has as its principle the instinct of preservation regarding the beings born to her. When these beings are able to take care of themselves, her task is fulfilled and nature requires no more of her. Thus, she abandons them in order to occupy herself with more newborns. 774. There are persons who infer from animals' abandonment of their offspring that the family ties among humans are merely a result of social customs and not a law of nature. What should we make of this? That's a great question. I've actually heard a lot of people say that too. I've met a couple who were in their, I want to say their late 50s, early 60s, and they had three kids. And when I asked them, "Hey, how are your kids doing? What's going on with them?" They said to me, "We don't know. We had our kids, and once they were able to take care of themselves, they went about their way." And I'm like, "Okay, well, aren't you interested in knowing how your grandkids are doing, how they're doing?" And they were like, "No, not really. We've done our job." And then a couple of years later, they themselves divorced. And when I asked the wife, because I was close to her, I said, "Why did you guys divorce? You guys seem happy. You had kids together. Everything was good." She goes, "Well, we filled our purpose. We got married, we reproduced, we had our kids, they grew up, they're good, and now we have no there's nothing else between us. We did what we needed to do." And I was like, "Damn, that's some cold-hearted shit." Like I did not think about it that way because I always thought that that was a very animalistic way of kind of looking at things. But it works for some people. That's some people create families and have relationships for very specific purposes, And then once those purposes are complete, they move on and they're okay with that. And it's like, all right, whatever. But I don't know, I'm not used to that, right? So that's what this question is about. It's like, what about people who look at it like that? What do you say about that? And here's the answer. Human beings have a different destiny than that of the animals. So why do you always want to identify with them? For humans, there is something beyond physical needs. There is the need to progress. Societal ties are necessary for progress, and family ties strengthen the social ties. Hence, family ties are a law of nature. God has thus willed that humans learn to love one another as brothers and sisters. 775. What would be the result for society if family ties were relaxed? A magnification of selfishness. And that's the end of that chapter. That was a very short chapter. Let me see how many pages are in this next chapter. We might keep going. You know what? It's very short. So let's keep going. We have 15 minutes left. We might as well. So this chapter is called The Law of Progress. And in this chapter, we discuss the state of nature, the march of progress, relapsed cultures, civilization, the progress of human legislation, and Spiritism's influence on progress. Let's get to it. The state of nature, 776. Are the state of nature and natural law the same thing? No. The state of nature is the primitive state. Civilization is incompatible with the state of nature, whereas natural law contributes to the progress of humankind. The state of nature represents the infancy of humankind and the departure point for their intellectual and moral development. Being perfectible and containing the seed of their own improvement within themselves, human beings are not meant to live forever in the state of nature, just as they are not meant to live forever in infancy. The state of nature is transitory, and humans leave it behind through progress and civilization. Natural law, on the other hand, rules humankind as a whole, and people improve to the degree that they comprehend and practice this law in a better manner. 777. Since there are fewer needs in the state of nature, human beings do not suffer all the tribulations they create for themselves in a more advanced state. So, what is it to be thought of the opinion of those who regard the state of nature as the state of perfect earthly happiness? Well, what do you expect? That sort of happiness is the ignorant happiness of the brute. There are humans who understand no other. It is being happy in the same sort of way as are the animals. Children, too, are happier than when they become adults. 778. Could humankind regress back to the state of nature? No. Humankind must progress without ceasing, and it cannot return to the state of infancy. It progresses because God has willed it so. Believing that it could regress back to its primitive condition would be denying the law of progress. So we've talked about this in previous chapters that the human spirit is continuously progressing. If it doesn't learn its lessons in the life that it's lived, it simply stays where it's at. And when it gets reborn again, that's where it starts and it keeps going. It doesn't regress. That's not a punishment of spirit. So if you're doing bad doings or if you're doing whatever, you'll get your punishments on the other side in terms of like lessons that you're going to learn. But and the life that you're going to be reborn in may not be the greatest because of your previous acts in previous lifetimes, but your spirit itself is not going to regress. The lessons that you have learned in the spirit are not going to regress. You're going to move forward from that. So just to kind of put that into perspective, right? So now we're on the subject of the march of progress. 779. Do humans draw from within themselves the power to progress, or is progress nothing more than the result of education? They advance naturally by themselves, not all progress at the same time or in the same manner. However, it is through social contact that the most advanced help the others to progress, right? 780. Does moral progress always follow intellectual progress? It is a consequence, but it does not always follow it immediately. Well, how can intellectual progress lead to moral progress? By making good and evil understandable. For them, humans can choose between the two. The development of free will follows the development of intelligence and increases the responsibility of humans for their acts. So then, how can one explain that the most enlightened cultures are often the most perverted? Complete progress is the goal, but like individuals, cultures only reach it step by step until they have developed the moral sense. They may use their intelligence to do evil. Morality and intelligence are two forces that only achieve balance over time. 781. Is humankind ever permitted to halt the march of progress? No, but it can sometimes slow it down. Well, what are we to think of those who attempt to halt the march of progress and cause humankind to regress? They are poor, conceited beings with whom God will chastise, and they will be swept away by the torrent that they meant to stop. Since progress is a condition of human nature, no one has the power to oppose it. It is a living force that flawed human laws may hinder but not stifle. When these laws become incompatible with progress, it overthrows them along with all the persons who attempt to uphold them. This will continue to be the case until humans harmonize their laws with divine justice. And divine justice desires the good for all, unlike those laws that are made for the strong at the expense of the weak. 782. Aren't there those who obstruct progress out of good faith, believing that they are helping it because, from their own point of view, they often see progress where it does not, in fact, exist? They are like a tiny pebble under the wheel of a large cart. A tiny pebble cannot keep a large cart from moving. 783. Does the perfecting of humankind always follow a slow, progressive march? There is a regular, slow progress that results from the force of things. However, when a culture does not advance quickly enough, then from time to time, God will cause a physical or moral jolt that transforms it. Humans cannot remain forever in ignorance, since they must reach the goal set by providence. They are enlightened by the forces of circumstances. Moral revolutions, like social revolutions, creep into people's ideas little by little. They germinate for centuries and suddenly burst forth, overthrowing the crumbling edifice of the past, which is no longer in accord with new needs and new aspirations. In such upheavals, people usually do not perceive more than the momentary disorder and confusion that affects their own material interests. Nevertheless, those who raise their thought beyond themselves admire the designs of providence, which bring good out of bad. And such upheavals are like the storms and disturbances that leave the atmosphere cleansed after having been disrupted. 784. Humankind's perversity is very great. Doesn't it seem like humans are regressing instead of progressing, at least from a moral point of view? You are mistaken. Observe the whole closely, and you will see that they are advancing because they have a better understanding of what evil is, leading them day by day to reform their abuses. The excess of evil will make them understand the need for the good and for reforms. And honestly, with the advent of technology, computers, and the internet, and the fact that we're communicating with each other and we're showing videos of atrocities and wars and evil doings and all that stuff that we see in the world around us, this is really teaching us all how to be good and how to avoid these horrible actions and how to hold people accountable and what justice should look like and what fair should look like and what charity should look like and all of that. So in a way, this widespread communication that we have is ultimately going to be for our benefit if we keep that in the back of our mind, that the sole purpose is to communicate with each other, do good for each other, do charitable things for each other, and move forward with each other, because all we have is each other. It'll make a huge difference. 785. What is the greatest obstacle to progress? Pride and selfishness. I am referring to moral progress, since intellectual progress is always occurring. Progress itself seems at first glance to double the intensity of these two vices by developing ambition and the love of wealth, but this in turn incites persons to pursue research that enlightens their spirits. It is thus that everything is related in the moral world as well as in the physical, and that good is brought out of evil itself. But this state of things will only last for a while. It will change as people better understand that beyond the enjoyment of earthly wealth, there is an infinity greater and long lasting bliss. There are two kinds of progress that mutually support each other, but which do not proceed in tandem: intellectual and moral progress. Throughout this century, intellectual progress among civilized cultures has received all the stimuli it could to desire and has reached an unprecedented level. Moral progress has also occurred, although not at the same rate. If we compare the social customs of a few centuries ago with those of today, we would have to be blind to deny that there has been progress. Then why should the ascendant march of morality be interrupted any more than that of intelligence? Why should there not be as great a difference in morality between the 19th century and the 24th centuries as there has been between the morality of the 14th centuries and the 19th centuries? To doubt this would be to assume that humanity has reached the apogee of perfection, which is absurd, or that it is to not morally perfectible, which has been disproved by experience. All right, now we are on the next subject of relapsed culture. So we're almost done with this chapter, you guys, like a couple more pages. Ooh, I'm cutting it close. We might go a little bit past 8, just a little bit. Or I could stop here, whatever you guys want me to do. 786. History has shown us that many cultures that relapsed into barbarity after shocking events deeply upset them. Where is the progress in such cases? When your house threatens to collapse, you demolish it in order to build a stronger and more comfortable one. Until it is rebuilt, however, there is trouble and confusion. A further example: you are a poor, you are poor and live in a hovel, but you become wealthy and leave it to live in a palace. Then some poor fellow, as you formerly were, comes and takes your place in the hovel and feels very content because he previously had no shelter at all. Very well. Learn from this that the spirits incarnated in those declining cultures are no longer the spirits who had comprised them during their time of splendor. You know what? I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop right here. And I know why. Number one, because I'm stumbling on my words and I hate doing that. Number two, I have this really strange feeling that there is an attendee who needs to hear what I'm about to read, and they're not in this live. So we're gonna put that off. All right, let's take some questions and let's take some comments. Let's see where we are. Is it saying that someone or a culture has met the ultimate progress? So no, Ginger, it's not saying that. What it's saying is that these cultures or these people, this progress doesn't happen at the same time. So there's two types of progress happening. There's an intellectual progress happening, and there's moral progress happening, all within the spirit, right? This is all happening within the body, right? And what they're saying is a lot of that the intellectual progress is continuous. It's always going because intelligence builds upon intelligence, right? Unless you unless you completely annihilate society like the way that the dinosaurs were annihilated, have to start from scratch. Unless it's something like that, intelligence builds upon intelligence. So the intellectual progress will always be what it is, but the moral progress, what they're saying is, doesn't necessarily go at the same rate. um, Humans have a difficult time with the moral progress of themselves as an individual person, and also as a culture and as a societal people. And so, you know, really what the whole point is that the best way to learn these things is through each other, right? So this is why having these crazy calamities and these crazy wars and all these things happening, although they're devastating and awful, sometimes they happen, and they're lessons that we can learn from to understand our own moral progress as a individual and as a society as a whole. And that the best way to learn it is through each other and through our progression with each other. Oh, thank you, Thomas. I try. The spirits are definitely more patient than we deserve, Kathy, girl. But you notice, I know you've been here for a couple of chapters. You do notice that sometimes when the spirits are answering questions, they be real snarky. They be like, Psh, I already told you. Or like, they'd be like, why are you asking me this? I already said this. And like, they get real snarky with Alan Kardec in the book, which is kind of funny. Um, but it's true. Like, spirits can be like that sometimes, you know? Blessings, blessings. You're in the UK, Marius? Shut up. Oh, wow. I never knew that you were all the way over there. I thought you were in the Americas. That's awesome. No problem, Ginger. That's what I'm here for. And listen, you guys, those of you guys who are on my TikTok, I now have the Q&A button that's on my profile, and that Q&A button is a great opportunity for you guys to ask questions in order for me to make videos for you guys, some 60-second content videos for you guys. So it's a great opportunity for you to give me some content ideas, and if they're related to mediumship, if they're related to the book, if they're related to any, or if you just have a question about anything, crystals, essential oils, spirit, whatever, just go to that Q&A little tab on my profile and by all means ask those questions because I would love to make more content for you guys, but I'm really not that creative in terms of like what should I make a video about. So give me some ideas. Aw, thank you, Marius. That is so sweet. Yeah, I do. I love it when the spirits slap them around too. They're so snarky. I love it. I am. I'm on, yes, Erica. So I'm on Facebook Live, but in my private Facebook group only. I'm not on my Facebook page. Because I feel like this information is meant for my group, really. So my Facebook group is called The Magical Solution. This is how we grow. So it's a private group, so you have to like actually look for it. Um, but if you find it, send a request, and I'll make sure to bring you in for sure. Okay, so why does one feel that they are being lured to Orisha? Also, understanding Lucifer, are they at a crossroads? Okay, so yeah, I would definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say that you're at a crossroads, but you're definitely at a place where the two don't really mix. So Lucifer is a whole different what's the right word for it? Ethnology? And the Orisha are a completely different set of spirits that belong to a completely different culture. Um, so I mean, it's totally okay to be interested in both, but one requires initiation and one does not. I don't really know. I don't work with Lucifer. I'm assuming it does not, but I would definitely ask people who work with Lucifer if that's something that is an initiatory practice. I really don't know. But they are definitely two very different things. So I can understand why you would say, am I at a crossroads here? Yes, I would. That's a great metaphor. I would definitely say that. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And stay tuned. So let's see when we're going to meet up again. I want to meet up next Sunday, the 14th, same time, 7 p.m. until 8 p.m. We're going to keep going with this book. And then I promise you, we're going to start the next book, which is the Mediums book. And that book, so basically, this book is really all about the science, the psychology, the anatomy, just all of the the foundation of spirit and the spirit world. Whereas the medium's book is going to be a lot more about the medium and the role of the medium and the faculties of the medium and how the medium does what they do. And so we'll be reading that book right after this one. So keep joining me. Let's get through this series together. Make sure you're taking lots of notes. Make sure that you have questions ready because this is how we grow, you guys. This is how we do our thing. Oh, Sunday the 14th is Mother's Day in UK? Okay, I mean, I can skip it that day if you want. That's not a big deal for me. You let me know. I could probably do it on a Saturday. All right, y'all. So have a beautiful, beautiful night, and we'll talk soon. Mwah. I'm gonna say goodbye to TikTok first. Bye, y'all. And then you guys. Bye.